9. The Craigslist roommate. You should always be extra careful about who you meet on the internet, and you probably shouldn't let them move into your home, no matter how desperate you are for rent money. 3 years after the incident, a Miami man who brutally beat his new roommate after meeting her online was finally sentenced to life behind bars. 39-year-old Byron Mitchell was found guilty by a jury of attempted murder and false imprisonment in the 2016 incident that left 23-year-old Danielle Jones in a coma for several weeks. Jones found Mitchell through a Craigslist ad for a roommate. "Rent is almost due. I'm gonna lose my home. Gonna get evicted. That'll ruin my life." And he seemed like a nice person, Jones said. So she let Mitchell move into her Miami apartment. But just 2 weeks later, on Valentine's Day, Mitchell allegedly put his hands around her neck and choked Jones. After he choked her, he then beat her head into the floor. Mitchell claimed Jones attacked him with a knife and he was simply defending himself. At Mitchell's trial, a very emotional Jones testified that Mitchell was the first person to respond to the ad. She desperately needed a roommate, and he seemed like a nice enough guy. Jones's mother said her daughter now has PTSD and severe trauma from brain injuries. Nightmares occur more often than not, and she's now terrified of strangers. 8. Dirt bike murder. A father's life was cut short, and his kid's life will never be the same again. A suspect in the murder of a man who was just trying to sell a dirt bike on Craigslist has been found guilty of armed robbery and first-degree murder. Dante Johnson was arrested in 2017 after shooting and killing 44-year-old James Beck in front of Beck's son, Stuart. Johnson and another man, Ramontre Williams, responded to the ad the father posted on Craigslist. When Beck and his son showed up to show Johnson the bike, Johnson handed Beck some cash, but it wasn't the same amount they had initially agreed upon before the meet. Stewart was one of the first witnesses to take the stand during the trial. He said his dad handed Johnson back his money when he realized it was short. That's when Johnson pulled out a gun and pointed it at the father-son duo. James and Stewart ran back to their truck to try and escape. He had turned the ignition over, got the truck started, and the firearm was shot by the taller individual, Stewart testified. The defense tried to shift the blame to Ramontre Williams during the trial, but Williams had already cut a deal with the state in exchange for his testimony against Johnson. When he learned just how much trouble he was really getting into, he decided to point the finger at someone else, Mr. Johnson, a defense attorney said. The jury was not persuaded, though. Dante Johnson is now facing first-degree murder for the death of James Beck and will probably spend the rest of his life in prison. His partner, Williams, pleaded guilty to his involvement in the crime and was sentenced to 12 years in jail and an additional 10 years probation. 7. Hairdresser horror. Craigslist is a one-stop shop for all your lifestyle needs. You can apply for a job, post a vacancy, or advertise your services there. One person who did the latter was Miriam Simpson, a 35-year-old hairstylist living in New Jersey. She made her business traveling to people's homes to cut and style their hair in exchange for money, but not every customer is going to love their new look. An incident reportedly broke out in 2016 when someone said they didn't like the new haircut they'd received. We're not quite sure how it happened, but apparently an argument broke out that ended very badly for the client. Simpson pepper sprayed her. While it isn't uncommon for women to carry pepper spray, the stuff tends to be used in extreme circumstances. This is the first time we've heard of it being applied during a home hairdressing visit. When Simpson was brought into custody, she was charged with aggravated assault and unlawful possession. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But when you can't see because your face is full of pepper spray, that idea goes out the window. 6. Rent arrangement. In 2018, a sleazy landlord in Wales was caught on camera promoting a sex for rent bargain in a disturbing undercover clip. The man posted an ad titled "Reduced Deposit/Rent Arrangement" or "Alternative Payments for Potential Tenants." The landlord was unmasked when undercover investigator Cian Thomas responded to the ad as a possible renter and met with him in person to negotiate the arrangement. The gross man was captured on tape offering sex in exchange for rent. He was clearly heard saying that he wants to help out and suggesting a friends with benefits arrangement. The man then offers his one bedroom for free in exchange for weekly sex. This issue, termed sex for rent, is growing more frequent in Wales, with many people advertising their home on Craigslist under the pretense of alternative payments negotiable. A man had put up an ad offering a free bedroom in Cardiff for a female with whom I can come to an arrangement. Another ad for a two-bedroom home near Newport said, "Rent greatly reduced in return for favors." Although posting these ads on classified sites is permissible, the Ministry of Justice claims that this kind of arrangement is forbidden under the Sexual Offences Act 2003. It is a crime to induce or incite somebody to become a prostitute, according to the law. Have you come across a similar Craigslist ad? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 5. Nothing out of the ordinary. In 2019, Luther Burris had posted an ad on Craigslist to sell his V8-powered 2005 Chrysler. A potential buyer called him, and they planned to meet in the parking garage of the St. Louis Park housing complex where Burris worked as a caretaker. The buyer showed up with a woman Burris believed to be his wife. They asked all the right questions, like how it drove, was there enough power, any damages or issues. All basic questions. I've sold and bought vehicles off Craigslist and it didn't seem anything was out of the ordinary, Burris said. Then the couple asked Burris if they could take a test drive, which was also custom. He agreed and they gave him keys to their lesser model car in exchange to ensure their return. Again, perfectly reasonable. But unfortunately for Burris, the couple never came back. Once it dawned on him that he got ripped off, he called the police. Detectives determined the car they left behind had been reported stolen, and there was at least one additional plate that belonged to a third stolen vehicle inside. Surveillance cameras were able to capture cars that were coming and going, but failed to get a clean shot of the thieves. I don't think it was their first time. Obviously, with as many stolen tags on the vehicle, it definitely wasn't their first or second time, Burris said. In the end, he was left without a car, and the suspects are still at large. 4. Thief caught selling smartphone. Things didn't go well for India Carmouche, a youngster from Slidell, Louisiana, whose master plan of making a few quick bucks from a stolen phone backfired. What was potentially supposed to be a lucrative theft ended up getting her arrested in 2015. India snatched a smartphone from a customer at Walmart who had carelessly left their phone on top of a water cooler while browsing another shelf. Not long after she stole the phone, she posted an ad on Craigslist to try and sell it. India never anticipated that the person she stole the phone from would be looking on Craigslist for a new device. The victim saw the ad and recognized her phone. She immediately notified the local authorities, initiating an inquiry by an undercover officer acting as a curious client. The potential buyer then revealed his identity as a police officer, to which India responded by trying to flee the scene and run away, something that obviously never ends well. She was apprehended and arrested for possession of stolen property and resisting arrest. 3. PS2 Slim came roach-infested. Viruses and bugs in games are nothing new, but actual real live creepy-crawly bugs inside a gaming system is something entirely different. A gamer that goes by Victorious1 responded to a Craigslist ad for a new PS2 after his own went out on him. He was super pumped when he found a replacement so quickly and also so cheap. He should have known it was too good to be true. But not long after he bought the PS2 from the ad, it also stopped working. He thought maybe he could fix it. But when he opened it up to get a look inside and have a look, he didn't find a virus or a loose wire. He found dead cockroaches, roach waste, and roach eggs. When he opened it, he was beyond shocked to find dead cockroaches, roach eggs, and waste in almost every corner of the gaming console. He said that eggs were all over the place. Yuck. Despite this horrible discovery, Victorious One saw the bright side and credited the hardware for having lasted so long. He stated that the PS2 is continually in use, as the prior owner said, until the roast infestation took over, which was only 2 days before the buy. The unfortunate gamer swore that his home was spotless. He said, "I guess it's time to wash my hands and vacuum the effing carpet." We hope he does. 2. Duped. In the year 2017, a defenseless autistic guy was scammed out of £30,900, $41,000, by a Craigslist conwoman. Roger Willis, the victim, responded to an online ad by 40-year-old Helen Williams of Bridge Street, Caernarfon. Helen was a drug addict. Roger, who was described as an easy target for scammers, was guaranteed a £5 million gain on his investment by Helen. Roger responded to a Craigslist post in 2017 and paid £75 initially, $100. But then Helen demanded more. Prosecuting counsel Anna Price said in court Helen told Roger she was having problems with her landlord and she was being threatened. She said she had been taken hostage, beaten, and dumped in the woods. He did exactly as she asked and continued to transfer money into Helen's account. Eventually, Roger's wife advised him to inform the police after Helen started making calls to him. However, he continued to send money to her in the vain hope that the fund existed, as well as out of genuine worry for Helen. Price further stated, he felt an overpowering sense of bitterness and regret. It affected his mental health, and it had a devastating impact on his relationship with his wife. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer at the time filing his statement. Sadly, Roger didn't live long enough to witness justice take its course. According to the prosecution, 3 of the offenses, including those disguising herself as her 70-year-old mother on Facebook. After stating she had significant financial troubles, she duped a relative of hers into paying 27 payments, totaling £3,670, $4,800. Helen had also approached a former co-worker of her mother's for money, and he too lent her at least £500, $660. People were really buying into all of her BS. Despite all the lies, her mother appeared in court to defend her daughter. According to Judge Timothy Petz, the investigation and prosecution of Helen Williams took an unacceptable amount of time, but imprisonment was unavoidable. Williams was finally sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in prison after confessing to 4 counts of fraud. 1. The stolen ring. Selling a few belongings on the internet is a tried and tested way to make some easy money. However, if the buyer turns up with no money, but a pistol instead, it's likely to scare the crap out of the best of us. A $10,000 engagement ring was reportedly stolen at gunpoint by a person who claimed he was willing to buy it, according to Westfield police this year. According to Captain Michael McCabe, the seller, who had posted the ring on Craigslist, met the potential buyer in the parking lot of a Friendly's restaurant near the Massachusetts Turnpike entrance. The possible buyer inspected the ring before handing over a black box with the agreed-upon cash amount. What the buyer did next was totally unexpected. He pulled out a revolver and pointed it at the seller. Then he snatched the ring and fled. The only description of the suspect was that he drove a silver car and was last seen around the Springdale Road area. It was a pretty avoidable circumstance with a very predictable ending. Anyone would feel compelled to give up their valuables when there's a gun pointed at their head. When you're short on cash, selling spare items to strangers online seems to be a simple solution. But don't be deceived. It's hard to discern who is real and who is a total fraud just from a Craigslist ad. Stranger danger, people. Stranger danger. 9. Whitney Buha. Whitney Buha is a Chicago-based lifestyle blogger whose typical beauty routine took an extremely disturbing turn last year when she went in for her regularly scheduled Botox injections. The person who administered the protein injected it into the wrong places, causing Whitney's left eye to sag and her right eye to be wide open. She posted a vlog revealing the eye-popping results, no pun intended, and explained that she felt embarrassed to go on camera, but felt compelled to open up about what had happened. After the appointment, the young woman noticed that her left eyebrow was lower than her right eyebrow. At the urging of her injector, she returned to the clinic and received 4 more units to her left eyebrow in hopes of evening them out. But the opposite happened, and Whitney's left eye began to droop even more. A specialist explained that her right eye was compensating for her impaired vision by opening extra wide. She tried numerous remedies, but the plain and simple truth is that Whitney had to wait until the Botox started to wear off. The good news is that the damage was only temporary, and it didn't completely ruin the woman's view of Botox. In fact, she told BuzzFeed that she still stands by it when it's done right. 8. Rachel Napier. 29-year-old Rachel Napier was expecting a typical girls' night when she attended a Botox party at a friend's house in Leicester, England in 2018. After injecting the young woman with Botox, the attending beautician noticed a lump on Rachel's lip. It was from an injury she had suffered when she was a teenager, and it was a major source of insecurity. So when the beautician recommended lip filler, Rachel readily agreed. What she didn't realize is that the injector was an unlicensed ex-con, and they accidentally injected the filler into a vein or artery. When Rachel awoke later that night, she couldn't feel her lips. They had swollen so big that her top lip was touching her nose. She went to the emergency room where she was told that the country's healthcare system didn't cover the treatment that she needed. The disfigured woman had to shell out money to see a private doctor who dissolved the filler. Within 3 days of receiving treatment, Rachel's lips were thankfully back to their normal size. But the close call inspired her to campaign for strengthening laws that regulate dermal filler in the UK. 7. Victoria Lee. Victoria Lee had been getting Botox injections for the better part of a decade when she decided to schedule an appointment with a provider she had never seen before in 2020. The makeup artist from Essex, England, was alarmed when the procedure hurt in a way it never had during her previous injections. Less than a week later, Victoria noticed some lumps forming on her face. Soon they turned into huge, red, pus-filled boils. Embarrassed about how she looked, she stopped leaving the house almost entirely, even shutting out her family and friends. Victoria told The Sun that she was also in constant pain. Whenever she patted her head dry after a shower, the boils would start to bleed. She also found blood on her pillow in the mornings. After her son asked her to stop taking him to school, she only left home for medical appointments. Last year, Victoria participated in the BBC documentary Under the Skin, The Botched Beauty Business, which is about the largely unregulated industry for non-surgical cosmetic procedures. The special revealed that she's one of at least 8 people who received botched injections from the same provider and has yet to figure out what's causing the lesions. 6. Tamika Rawson. Australian TikToker Tamika Rawson is just one of many beauty influencers who have openly expressed their enthusiasm for Botox, which has become one of the industry's most sought-after procedures. But getting the injections comes with risks, and earlier this year, Rawson was unlucky enough to join the minority of patients who experience a botched Botox job. After receiving the protein in her lower face, Tamika was left looking like she had a golf ball stuffed into each side of her jaw. She took to social media with the undesired results. prompting one commentator to point out that she resembled a hamster storing food in its mouth. Rawson handled the disappointing experience surprisingly well, pointing out that Botox thankfully only lasts 3 months and that she expected the effects to wear off. She told her followers that she planned to get Botox again in the future. Several users mentioned having similar experiences and suggested that the problem could be fixed with even more Botox. Expert Rupesh Shah from the London Lip Clinic told The Sun that the mishap may have been caused by the provider injecting in the wrong place or diluting the product too much, and agreed that more Botox to relax the surrounding muscles in Tamika's face might help. 5. Nikita Kimberly. Just days after getting Botox and lip filler injections last year to even out her smile, a 21-year-old Dutch TikToker named Nikita Kimberly was left with a visibly crooked smile. She told her followers that she got the injections to calm down a muscle that she said was working a bit too hard, causing a dent in her chin. With her mouth closed, Kimberly looked no different than before, but it was a different story whenever she talked or smiled. She claimed that the Botox had traveled to the wrong side of her face, causing her mouth to droop and giving her a lisp. The young woman also developed a new habit of biting her tongue when she talked. Unlike some other influencers who continued to use Botox after the ill effects of a botched treatment wore off, Kimberly's ordeal left her feeling dead set against the procedure. In a TikTok video explaining what had happened, she said she was all for lip fillers, but strongly cautioned her followers against Botox. Commenters reassured Kimberly that her face would return to normal when the toxin wore off, and they blamed the provider more than the Botox itself, suggesting that the injections had been administered in the wrong place. Good news came several weeks later when the young woman posted an update reporting that her condition was improving and that she was starting to feel happier with her appearance. 4. Carol Bryan. Florida resident Carol Bryan began getting Botox injections to minimize some fine lines in her face when she was in her 30s. At age 47, she visited a clinic she'd never been to before. The staff talked her into trying dermal fillers, which add volume to a person's face in areas that are thinning due to age. After the procedure, Carol's forehead began swelling every few days before shrinking back to its normal size. A few months later, her forehead swelled, and this time it didn't stop growing. She returned to the clinic where dissolving agents were injected to bring the swelling down. During the visit, Carol learned that silicone had somehow mistakenly ended up in the syringe that was used to administer her botched filler. Silicone is never used for facial procedures due to its dangerous and disfiguring effects. The clinic promised to fix Carol's face free of charge with regular appointments. Not knowing what else to do, she obliged. But her face only became more disfigured as the dissolving agent ate away at her muscle and tissue. The woman's skin began to sag and her forehead filled with pus. Unable to cope with the reflection in the mirror, she quit her job, became a shut-in, stopped letting friends and family come over to visit, and even thought about taking her life. Carol spent years living as a recluse until her daughter, Sophia, couldn't take seeing her mom in such a miserable state and reached out to teaching hospitals in a desperate plea for help. Renowned plastic surgeon Brian Boyd took her case and managed to repair a lot of the damage. It would be an understatement to say that Carol's road to recovery has been long and both physically and emotionally challenging. She's now blind in one eye and will probably never look like she did before the botched procedure. But she's using her story to help others and works as the director of a nonprofit called Face to Face Healing, which is dedicated to raising awareness about disfigurements. 3. Montana Morris. Several years ago, Florida-based TikToker Montana Morris noticed that she was experiencing symptoms of an uncomfortable jaw condition called TMJ. Her jaw began locking regularly and for days or even weeks at a time. After suffering for 2 years, the 24-year-old decided to get some Botox injections in her jaw, which is a common procedure for alleviating TMJ symptoms. The clinic Morris went to was running a special on Dysport, which is a similar neurotoxin to Botox, but it's not exactly the same, and the dosage is measured in different units. Within 4 days of receiving the injections, the young woman's lower facial muscles more or less began to freeze. Her smile shrank and her dimples disappeared. Morris told her followers that the treatment did succeed in unlocking her jaw, but that her pain had worsened. During a follow-up appointment, a staff member told her that the provider she saw had miscalculated the dose and injected the Dysport in the wrong place. At first, the business reportedly tried to shrug off the situation, telling Morris that this kind of thing happens sometimes and that most people don't mind it. But with some persistence, she managed to get a full refund. And while it was less than pleasant to wait for the treatment to wear off, the undesired effects were thankfully temporary. 2. Marcelle King. Marcelle King of Dorset, England, found herself hospitalized and close to death in 2013 after receiving Botox injections from a con man posing as a licensed medical provider. She found the bogus doctor, Ozan Milan, on Facebook and made an appointment without looking too deeply into his credentials. In a later interview on the BBC series Fake Britain, King said that Milan's ad looked legitimate. She also explained that she had never gotten Botox before and admittedly knew very little about it, but expected it to be a straightforward procedure that would knock a few years off. When King arrived at the London address Milan had given her, she realized it was a private home. She described entering his kitchen and seeing an array of large needles on the table, where she sat down and received the injections. Milan reportedly reassured King that he would do the injections quickly and that she wouldn't feel anything. But the shots were excruciating, and he responded by saying, "No pain, no gain." King said that she felt as if she had been burned with cigarettes. Even after experiencing such horrific pain, she went against her husband's advice and booked a second appointment with Milan. This time, her forehead burned so badly that she was rushed to the emergency room just minutes after the procedure. It took a large amount of steroids and antihistamines for her to narrowly avoid death. As it turned out, King had been injected with an unknown and extremely dangerous substance, and Milan was not qualified to perform cosmetic procedures. Her horrifying ordeal is one of 2 cases that led to Milan's conviction on charges of inflicting grievous bodily harm. There was a third victim, but the court was unable to prove that Milan had falsely claimed to be medically trained before giving her a round of harmful injections. 1. Shiva Ashkani. Back in 2015, the owners of a Toronto tanning salon decided to start offering Botox and filler injections. During their search for a qualified provider, they interviewed a woman named Shiva Ashkani, who presented them with a diploma qualifying her as a registered nurse. She claimed that she had 13 years of experience working as a nurse in Toronto and Beverly Hills. It looked like Ashkani was a perfect fit for the job, but it wasn't long before things began to go wrong. After receiving $700 worth of Botox and fillers, one patient was left with bleeding, pea-sized bumps on her face. She felt sick after getting the injections, experienced blackening around her eyes for several weeks, and developed a hole on her forehead. Another patient noticed discolored and raised skin around her eyes after paying $800 for injections from Ashkani. There was a third victim who found Ashkani through the Canadian advertising website Kijiji. She spent $850 on Botox, fillers, and a chemical peel. The peel left the patient in excruciating pain and feeling like her skin was burning. Her eyes were nearly swollen shut by the time she re-entered the waiting room. As it turned out, Ashkani was not a registered nurse, and she certainly wasn't qualified to perform cosmetic treatments. She was charged with fraud and assault after her victims spent thousands of dollars fixing the facial disfigurements she had caused. Ashkani was found guilty in 2019 and was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 3 years of probation.
Number 10. House Poor. In Boca Raton, Florida, a woman living in a dream mansion on Long Lake Drive was busted stealing roughly over $1,000 worth of clothing from a Saks store. When asked by the police why she needed to steal the clothes, she cried that it was because her husband took all her money. She said she wanted to purchase the clothing for her daughter, who had an important trip to New York coming up. And while we can all sympathize with that, it's still a pretty strange situation. You'd never expect somebody living in a home worth over $3 million in a neighborhood with a fancy name like Long Lake Estates to be stealing clothes from a department store. This woman's name is Deborah Engelhardt, and she stole a whole heap of clothing from the Saks store in March of 2022, including shirts that cost over $100 each. According to the Boca Raton police, she selected a large number of items and then swiftly stuffed them in her brown handbag. Satisfied, she marched out of the doors and made a break for it. But she didn't get very far before she was arrested. Deborah was taken to the Palm Beach County Jail, then released on a bond of $3,000. For a woman with no money, she ended up having to pay twice the value of the stolen clothing just to get herself back home. Number 9. Killed over a Red Bull. In the summer of 2021, a gas station clerk in Indiana thought himself quite the hero when he chased down a shoplifter. The shoplifter had come into the store before midnight on June 29th. The convenience store clerk, 49-year-old Vincent Bibbs, noticed Damon McLean, also 49, acting a little suspiciously. Damon was lurking around the store and clearly appeared to be up to no good. Then, Vincent saw with his own eyes Damon put 4 packs of Red Bull in a garbage bag and walked towards the door. It's a pretty bizarre move to do something like that. And while understandably frustrating to see, it certainly didn't warrant what came next. It's hard to say if Vincent was at the end of his rope with shoplifters, if he was mentally unstable, or if he just kind of snapped. Whatever it was, Vincent chased Damon out of the store and into the parking lot. There, he demanded that the thief hand over the Red Bull. Damon refused and instead got into his car and tried to drive away. That was when Vincent pulled out a 9mm handgun, dashed to the driver's window, and blew the shoplifter away. Following the murder, Vincent went back into the store, helped some customers, and then called the police to report what had happened. Naturally, nobody's life is worth a pack of Red Bull, not even 4 packs of Red Bull. Vincent has since been charged with murder and could face life in prison. Number 8. Shoplifting Sergeant. A sergeant with the NYPD was busted stealing $360 worth of fast fashion clothes from a Macy's department store. Her name was Eva Pena, and she was 39 years old when she got busted in 2019 for her rather fruitless shoplifting scheme. Eva wasn't just an ordinary police officer, she was a full sergeant. She was apparently friendly with the commissioner, she was well respected in the community, and she was making over $107,000 a year. Yet, after she was arrested in the Bronx for stealing some totally insignificant pieces of clothing, she was suspended. $100,000 a year down the drain. Plus, now Eva's gonna need to find herself a new job. If you're wondering how it all played out, it was honestly like something you would expect a teenager to do. Eva was seen by security at the department store, removing tags from clothing and stuffing them in her bag. She tried to sneak out the door with 6 items in her bag, including a pair of pants, a lace dress, and a beaded shirt. It was extra embarrassing for the department because she had recently posed with the police commissioner James O'Neill at an event. Number 7. Shot point blank. Ernesto Aguilar shoplifted from Walmart on January 19, 2022, and was punished by a police officer holding him down on the ground and shooting him point blank in the head. Ernesto, 30 years old and from Santa Ana in California, was held down by multiple police officers who can only be described as executioners. Body cam footage of the incident revealed the 3 deputies with the Orange County Sheriff's Office pinning him down on the ground, holding the barrel of a gun directly against his head, and then pulling the trigger. Here's where things get even worse. The incident took place at a Lake Forest Walmart when the security guard called the police to report Ernesto. The security guard suspected Ernesto and the woman he was with were planning to steal electronic items using a fake receipt. However, The couple were standing in the checkout line with cash in hand, ready to pay for toys and diapers for their kids when the cops arrived. The police didn't check the situation. They didn't look at anyone's receipts. They just started bullying the couple. Things spiraled out of control almost immediately. The police shouted and screamed and cursed at Ernesto, and they pinned him to the ground. Then one of the officers screamed, "He's got a gun! Shoot him! Shoot him!" It was a miracle that Ernesto didn't die. He underwent emergency surgery and should make a full recovery. However, he's been charged with possession of a gun and has a bail of $2.3 million. The police officers who held the man down and shot him in the head have yet to get in any trouble at all. Number 6. Refuge at a funeral. In Austin Town, police captured a shoplifting suspect with a rather unusual getaway plan. It all started with a Walmart loss prevention officer in late March of 2022. The officer started following a woman around the store. He had been a loss prevention officer long enough to know there was something not quite right about her. He watched as she picked up 181 items and put them in a shopping cart. Then he followed her to the automatic cash registers, where she only scanned a handful of the items before leaving. She really thought that by paying for only a couple of items, nobody would notice her walk out of the store with an entire cart. The woman fled when she realized she was busted, leaving the cart and all the merchandise behind. Then she tried to evade the police by ducking into a funeral home. It didn't work, and the suspect, identified as Laura Fowler, was escorted away in handcuffs. Number 5. The Shoplifting Cop. William Dickey was a 39-year-old Providence police officer in 2021 when he got busted doing something you would never expect a cop to do. He and his wife Tara, both from Cranston, entered their local Lowe's home improvement store to do a bit of shopping. William wandered around the store for a while and filled his cart to the brim with R30 insulation. As he was moving around the store collecting the insulation, his wife was busy sticking a new air conditioner in a shopping cart. Then, when they had collected everything they needed, they approached the cash registers. But instead of stopping, Dickey and Tara went straight out the front door, as if they weren't robbing the place blind. An officer and his wife made off with over $400 worth of merchandise, and it was all caught on camera. And guess what William Dickey got when he was busted shoplifting from a home improvement store? According to the Providence Public Safety Commissioner, William got himself suspended with pay. In other words, he got a paid vacation for shoplifting. He and his wife were both charged on one misdemeanor count of shoplifting, but it's not a very big charge. And since it's been a little while now since the incident without any real repercussions, it's safe to say William is probably keeping his job as a police officer. Number 4. Rite Aid employee killed. An employee at Los Angeles Rite Aid was killed in July of 2021 while bravely trying to stop a shoplifter. Now, anyone who's worked in retail knows you're not supposed to interfere when somebody starts stealing. You figure out who they are, you get a hold of the police, and you stay out of their way. But sometimes it's hard to ignore, and in the end, you really can't blame the employee for trying to do what he felt was right. According to the LAPD, the store employee Miguel Penaloza confronted the thieves at around 8:45 at night. They were trying to leave the store with stolen items, but they also had a gun. The employee hadn't realized he was walking into a shootout. When he told the men to stop what they were doing and get back in the store, one of them turned around and shot him. Miguel died right there on the floor of the Rite Aid. Thankfully, the shoplifter/killer was apprehended shortly after the tragic death of Miguel. His name is Anthony Lemus, and he's facing 1 count of murder and 1 count of second-degree robbery. Number 3. Violence at the Stop and Shop. It was just before 10 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, March 26, 2022, when a Boston police officer arrived at a Stop and Shop in response to a shoplifting in progress. The officer had been at the South Bay Shopping Center already when one of the staff members said they had spotted a suspected shoplifter in the store. The officer moved in with store employees to take care of the situation, and that was when things turned violent. The officer had tried to be peaceful to resolve the situation and recover the stolen items, but the suspect lashed out and assaulted the officer. In his sudden attack, the shoplifter removed the cop's portable radio so he couldn't call for help, and then wrestled him to the ground. The officer tried in vain to get the man off him, and then found himself mounted and being strangled. The perp, later identified as Patrick Craddock of Boston, had both his hands around the officer's throat trying to strangle the life out of him. by sheer luck and determination, the officer managed to grab his radio and call for backup. More officers arrived quickly before Patrick could strangle the officer to death, and he was arrested and taken away. He was then arraigned on charges of assault and battery on a police officer, as well as the lesser shoplifting charge. Number 2. The hidden compartment. Dorothy Gibson was not your ordinary shoplifter. She was what you might call a career shoplifter, a professional who sometimes got caught but more frequently got away with it. She has been arrested at least 13 times and has a total of 20 convictions. Her most recent arrest came in 2021 when she was busted by the police in a Wichita Falls Walmart. They discovered she had a hidden compartment in her purse that she used to hide shoplifted items. That way, even when she was grabbed for suspicion, no security officer would find anything because the compartment concealed the stolen stuff. But this time, the compartment didn't work. She was sentenced to spend 4 years in prison for tampering with evidence and another 15 months in a state jail for theft and drug possession. But perhaps the most unique thing about this case is that Dorothy's arrests go all the way back to 2008. You can actually line up her mugshots nearly every single year from 2008 to 2021. Watching over a decade of drug abuse take its toll on Dorothy's face as she slowly looks worse from year to year. It's really quite a shame, and hopefully over 4 years in prison will set her straight. Number 1. Left Behind. On a Saturday in September of 2021, a trio of women went on a stealing spree in Edwardsville, Illinois. It was a shoplifting trip that ended in disaster for one of them, who got left behind by her friends and was forced to face the music. It happened at Hibbett's Sporting Goods. As soon as the 3 women entered the store, the employees recognized them as shoplifters. One of them had even been busted stealing from that store in the past, so the employees called the police. By the time the women were exiting the building, the cops had already shown up. There wasn't much these 3 women could say in their defense. They literally walked out of the store with clothes they had just grabbed off the rack. They didn't even try to cover up their thievery, and walked out of the store with dozens of pieces of clothing draped over their arms. They all ran to a vehicle parked nearby. 2 of them got inside, but the 3rd got locked out. It looked like the driver turned on the ignition and put the car in drive, which automatically locked the doors. Instead of hitting the unlock button and waiting an extra 3 seconds for their friend, the 2 other girls took off and left her standing there in the parking lot. The woman had nowhere to go and nowhere to hide, and so she dropped the stolen clothing on the ground and gave herself up to the police. She was arrested and charged, but there's no word on whether she gave up her accomplices or not. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get caught stealing bananas in your pants or get caught stealing from the dollar store? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.